So I'm about to cut my race pedal down to a shorter height, and then afterwards, I'll explain to you guys why. So the tools I'm using today to cut my pedal down to a shorter height are an industrial heat gun, glue gun, some sandpaper, tape measure, saw, tape, and a Sharpie there. So first thing I'm gonna do here is get my paddle clamped into this table, close it up here. Just nice and tight. This is not gonna be moving on me. There we go. Next up, I'm gonna install some tape here around the top of the handle, or where I'm gonna be doing my cutting at. Ones will help kind of protect the shaft from splintering as I cut it with the saw, as well as allow me to mark up the shaft as well with my measurements for where I want to cut the shaft at also. There we go. I'm also going to put some tape up here at the top of the actual handle itself, where I could do my marking. Now currently my paddle is cut to 82 inches tall, and today I'm going to cut 1.5 inches off of that, bring it down to 80.5 inches tall overall. Now I'm personally am 76 inches tall, so it kind of gives you an idea of my paddle height ratio in comparison to my personal height. So next up now, we're going to measure down and mark where we want to make the cut. Today on my paddle, so I'm going to drop it 1.5 inches down, put my tape measure out here. And so I'm just going to measure down 1.5 inches here on the shaft. So I'm going to put my tape here to the top of the actual shaft here. So put it right here next to it, the best I can. Mark it 1.5 inches down right here, so I know exactly where to make the cut. And another great tip I learned from a video I watched from Black Project Sup as well on their YouTube channel is bring some down right here to make a line from where your current handle is here on the top of your shaft, right here, as well as down here where it's going to be at after you make the cut. That way, after we cut the shaft off here, and when I go to put my handle back into the paddle shaft, all I have to do is line these two marks up once again, and know that my handle here is lined up once again for the new paddle shaft. All right, next up we're gonna get our heat gun going here and warming up. So we can heat up the top part of this handle and slide the handle right on out of the shaft. Also a good idea to wear some protection over your hands, because this handle will get very hot as well from the heat gun. Just gonna do a nice job of kind of going all around the paddle shaft here. All right, it's down right here. I'm just gonna take this. You see, it'll just kind of easily pull right out of that paddle shaft. Perfect. Put this down over here. Ooh, it's nice and hot. All right, now here comes the scary part of actually having to cut the paddle shaft. Get this right where I want it. Here we go. Ooh, a little wobbly. Whoop, there it is. So I'm gonna come back with a piece of sandpaper now. Get kind of leveled off here so it wasn't made a most perfect cut. Also smoothed off on the edges. I'm also put the sandpaper inside here a little bit also. Kind of roughen up these edges inside of it a little bit to help the glue get a nice hold and bond once I put the handle back in. That'll work. All right, now I'd like to heat up the shaft one more time before I glue up the handle, put it back in there. This just kind of helps the shaft expand, open a little bit again, and makes it a little bit easier to slide the handle back into the shaft. All right, put it down. Grab my hands here once again. Grab my glue gun. I'll start just lathering some glue on here. So we get a nice stick and bond to the inside of our shaft. All right, it's looking pretty good. That back down here. It's back into focus. All right, all we're gonna do now is just slide this back into here. You see it kind of makes a mess too with this glue. And all we're gonna do is just kind of line up those two marks again. We had it before to know that our handle here is nice lined up, that mark. So that way we know it's nice lined up with our paddle blade as well. Let's get that right there. I'm gonna clean a little bit of this extra glue up. Just use my sandpaper right here. Sorry, it's pretty easy to rub off as well. You see here, I'm just gonna push it over the top of my tape. So pull right off the tape. Once I'm done. All right, now all there is left to do is simply pull this tape back off of our handle here. And pull all this tape off of the shaft. Well, there she is, folks, a nice clean-cut paddle shaft, ready to go for the next paddle session. Now, I do advise if you decide to cut your paddle shaft also to wait at least 24 hours after you apply the glue to give it time to fully bond the handle to your paddle shaft. As well as some people also like to put some tape around this seam as well to help prevent water from going inside the paddle shaft. I personally never found that a need to do that, but it isn't an option if you decide to do that as well for your paddle shaft. All right, now let's talk about a few reasons why I decided to cut my paddle height to a shorter height. The first major reason for this is the type of paddle board that I'm currently paddling on. In the past, I did a lot of my training and paddling on an inflatable race board. So with that, as most inflatables, you actually stand higher above the water's surface as you're paddling along, which therefore means you need to use a longer paddle shaft as you're paddling for good form still. But now I'm doing all my paddling and training sessions on a dugout board. So with that, I'm actually standing lower or closer to the water's surface. So therefore, I'm now needing to use a lower paddle shaft in order to help my form and have the most efficient paddle stroke possible. Now, when I first got this board a few months back and started paddling on it, I did lower my paddle height by an inch. But after months now of paddling with that and trying out new forms, working my technique and improving it, I now decided I actually need to lower my paddle height further down even more, which you saw I did today, by another 1.5 inches in order to have a better paddle size, better fit the style of paddling I'm currently doing. Now this leads me to my second point, which is the type of paddling that I'm currently doing. As you've probably seen in my most recent videos, I'm doing a ton of training and a ton of preparing for upcoming races and trying to be the fastest or most efficient paddler that I can be. So with that, my form or style of paddling is much different than, let's say, tour paddles or just chill paddles. So when it comes to those chill paddles or those tour paddles, you do tend to stand in a more upright position as you're taking the scenery around you. So with that, you're just needing to use a longer paddle shaft as you're standing more upright, allowing you to still have good reach and still good depth of bearing your blade in the water as you're paddling along. But when it comes to race training, which is what I'm currently doing, we tend to stand in a more aggressive stance. So with that, my stance is much lower as I'm getting more reach and more power into my paddle strokes as I focus on that, as I said, power and efficiency as I'm paddling along at my top speed for races. So with that, since I'm standing in a lower stance, I now have to use a lower, shorter paddle shaft, allow me to have faster cadency as well as maintaining good form as well as I'm paddling in that more aggressive stance. So hopefully that gives you an idea what I'm talking about when I'm comparing going for like a tour paddle versus race training of how the different stances do affect the type of paddle length that you want to be using. Now this next point we'll talk about, which I kind of mentioned already, which is how just length of your paddle will actually affect how good or how awkward of a stroke you will have as you're paddling along. So as I said, since I'm in a more aggressive stance now for my race paddles, and as I'm working more on my form through my booth training program, my stance is much lower. So with that, with using a longer paddle shaft I found over the previous few months, is that my stroke feels a little bit awkward in my hand now as I'm going through my paddle stroke rate, as well as when I'm switching sides of my board with my paddle, I have to find it a little awkward as I have to pull higher up out of the water to get my paddle all the way up and over my board, switch to the other side to put it back in the water once again. So over time, over practice, I feel like my paddle stroke has become a little bit awkward trying to maintain a longer paddle shaft in a lower, more aggressive stance. Now, it definitely goes by practice and trial and error, so I can't just really give advice that will fit everybody, as you will simply have to go out for yourself, continue to paddle and put the hours in the water, and find what that right length is for you that works for your paddle stroke, where you feel good, powerful, and efficient, and you don't feel awkward as you're paddling along. Now, this last point I'm going to touch on is a simple one, but it simply has to do with listening to my body. Now, as I have been training pretty aggressively over these previous few months, I do a lot of listening to my body to see how I'm feeling and make sure I'm not putting too much strain or pressure on my body as I'm paddling these more aggressive workouts. Now, over these previous few months, as I have been using this longer shaft as well, I have noticed I start to feel a little bit more strain on my shoulders as I'm paddling through these workouts. Now, typically for your paddle shaft length, when you're using a longer shaft or too long of a shaft, you'll start to feel some more discomfort and pain on your upper body, such as your shoulders. Vice versa, if you're using too short of a paddle shaft, you'll start to feel more pain and more discomfort in your lower back or lower part of your body as you're paddling along. So the goal is to find a happy medium where you're using the right amount of muscles through your whole entire upper body and lower body as you're paddling along and not feeling too much discomfort in one area versus the other area. So with that, as I have been listening to my body, as I've been doing these workouts, I have felt a little bit more uncomfort in my shoulders as I'm doing my paddle strokes. So with that, I kind of know I need to lower my paddle shaft a little bit more in order to even out my load or workforce throughout my entire body as I'm paddling along. So all in all, I hope that this video has been helpful to you guys when it comes to helping you decide what paddle height you should be using during your paddle sessions. And if you are new to stand-up paddle boarding and you're not sure what height you should be using at all, I highly recommend checking out Black Project Sub's paddle size chart, which I'll link down below, where you can simply compare your size or height as a paddler to the type of paddleboard you're using, as well as the style of paddling that you're doing. And they'll give you a rough guide of what paddle height you should be using during your paddle sessions. As well, if you are using a fixed paddle shaft and you do decide you want to cut your shaft to a lower height, be sure not to cut it too low too early, as obviously if you cut it too short, you can't just add more paddle shaft on top of that. So make sure if you are trying to try out different paddle sizes to cut down a little bit at a time until you find that correct height that you want to be using on the water. Or better yet, if you have an adjustable paddle shaft, use that first, as you can easily adjust the paddle up and down to different sizes to help you decide which height that you prefer to use for your paddling sessions. So that's it for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to give it a like, leave a comment down below. Catch you guys in the next video.